Let's go ahead and get started. Happy New Year, everyone. My name is Allison Dennis. I serve as Executive Director for the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology. Welcome to all of you as we come together for our first resident talk of 2022. Our community is joining in, including right now, from all over, and Sitka's roots are here on the North Central Oregon coast. We acknowledge and thank the first peoples and stewards of this place, who today are actively represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. Okay, imagine you work at a nonprofit and there's been a 2-year-long pandemic. I know it's a crazy scenario, but just step inside it with me. Now imagine just the heart swell of joy and gratitude that you would feel each time a longtime sponsor renewed their support or a new person made a first gift. We want to thank the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation and Jordan Schnitzer for their extraordinary sponsorship of Sitka. Thank you to all of our generous sponsors and foundations, including Schwabe, Williamson and Wyatt, McMinimans, Scott Ceramics, Framing Resource, Brian Potter Design, Park Lane Suites, Lake Oswego Festival of the Arts, Palettes Northwest, Explore Lincoln City, Siltstone Wines, McLean's Printmaking Supplies, the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Robert and Mercedes Eichholz Foundation, the Kinsman Foundation, Oregon Community Foundation, Oregon Arts Commission, and Oregon Cultural Trust. You fuel our work in service of artists and ecologists of all ages and experiences, including the 6 Sitka residents who will speak tonight. We want to thank Sitka's co-founders, Jane and Frank Boyden, and all 151 of Sitka's past and present board members, along with countless volunteers, neighbors, members, and financial supporters. Special thanks to all who included Sitka in your annual giving and at the end of this year, and to those who sponsored this year's gift matching challenge. Together, you broke a personal best for Sitka in 2021. We can't wait to deepen our impact in 2022, thanks to you. Speaking of members, Sitka's 2022 summer workshop season is online now to preview. Don't go there now though, stay for the talk, and then after the talk, you can look at the workshops. Members first early registration opens on February 23, so you can preview now. Members register starting on the 23rd, followed by open registration on March 9. On February 10, from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m., we're hosting a special online fundraiser and celebration for our youth program. The event is called Your Art's Desire, including highlights from last year, kids' voices, teacher perspectives, and a look at what's to come. You can watch for more info in our newsletter next week, and maybe someone can put a link or something in the chat here tonight too for folks that want to learn more about that event. Our next online resident talk is on March 17th. Tonight, if you have questions or comments, please share them and we'll do our best to respond through the Q&A or the chat. We've got 6 presenters, so we'll use the time to focus on their presentations tonight, but feel free to reach out through the chat if you want to ask or share something. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the first of our 6 residents who will take us inside their work tonight. Avantika Bawa lives and works in Portland, Oregon. Originally from New Delhi, India, she received an MFA in painting from the School of Art of the Art Institute of Chicago and a BFA in the same from the Maharaja Sayajirao University in India. Noteworthy exhibits include solos at the Portland Art Museum, Suyama Space in Seattle, Columbus Museum, Georgia, Saltworks Gallery, and the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center in Atlanta, Georgia, Nature Mort and Gallery Mascara in India, White Box and Districta, Portland, Oregon. Avantika has participated in the Skowhegan, is that right? Not quite right, close enough. UCross, McDowell Colony, Kochi Biennial Foundation, and the Degrassi Residencies, among others. The recipient of several awards, notably the Oregon Arts Commission Joan Shipley Award, the Crow Shadow Institute of the Arts 2018 Golden Spot Residency Award, and the Hallie Ford Fellowship presented by the Ford Family Foundation. Avantika is currently Associate Professor of Fine Arts at Washington State University, Vancouver, Washington. I know technically all of your mics out there are muted, but we believe in the power of magical realism here at Sitka. So wherever you are, near and far, please make some noise. We will hear it here. So please make some noise and welcome Avantika Bawa to the Sitka Center.
Woo-hoo. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Allison. I'm going to put my timer on so that I stay within my 10 minutes and 32 seconds, which was a little bonus. All right, I'm going to just jump right to it, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. Yes. For people who are joining in from Portland and everywhere, in fact, thank you again. It's a beautiful Thursday, at least in the Pacific Northwest. The sun just came out because of our talk. So stay through the talk and then you can go enjoy the sunshine, because that's what I'm going to do with my fellow residents. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of give you a little overview of my practice. There's no real chronology. And I urge you, if the work is of any interest, to check out my website at the end, because 10 minutes and less than 10 minutes at this stage is a very short time to cover work I've done for 40 plus years. So I like to start with the general image that is the overarching essence of what I do, with a list of words. That is kind of an artist statement, but more than that, it's basically little things that I think about, whether while making drawings, sculptures, installation, or also just while making, thinking, and navigating. So the work you'll see in the next few slides is some combination of these things. I've been making site-specific installations for a very, very long time. But since 2012, back and forth, I've been focused a lot on scaffolds, because I like how ubiquitous and utilitarian they are. As an artist who works very geometrically, the verticals, horizontals, diagonals, pre-existing structure have always appealed to me. So what started as a desire to figure out what I could make that alluded to the language of construction resulted in my first scaffold installation, which was at Gallery Mascara in Mumbai, in the middle of a very chaotic construction zone. So it made sense to pay homage to this monolithic structure, which is a symbol of construction, a language of making that is very much something that informs my practice. So from this first scaffold, I started, this was just a one-off piece, and I thought this was the one and only time I was going to work with a scaffold. And in this project, not only do you have a scaffold, you have a suite of photographs that also play off that language of construction, construction site's office, a full land surveyor, etc. After having done this project in 2012, I was working on many other projects, but in 2016, when I was invited to do work for the Portland Biennial curated by Michelle Grabner, with the site at the Astor Hotel in Astoria, after fumbling and thinking about what I could do, the idea of just revisiting the scaffold was put forth to me. I embraced it and made my second scaffold installation. And in this case, I chose to paint the scaffold a golden as an homage to a decaying building that was now trying to come alive again through reconstruction and regentrification, if you will. So the golden scaffold out here is an homage to the guests of this hotel, the Astor Hotel, past and present. And when I started painting it, the first material I used actually was a mineral spirit to degrease it. And I thought that would be a nice title for the work, as not just a direct reference to the material, but also an homage to the history of this grand building. Fast forward, my third installation that was done in 2019. It is the most epic work I've done so far. And I know many of you have heard me speak, have heard me talk about this over and over again. I apologize, but I do like the work. And I thought in this context, I could draw a little reference to the colors that helped me choose pink. It was the flamingos in the region. It was the embroidery of the region, and it was the glow of the sunset. This region is called the Great Run of Kutch, which is in Gujarat, and it's very close to the border of Pakistan in India. And the idea of working with this space just came very serendipitously. In fact, some of my grandest, boldest ideas just come when I'm not really thinking too hard about them, and learning how to just hone into those ideas and believing that I can make something bigger, better, and really, really convincing with it is what's important to me. Long story short, I found the perfect group of people to work with. They gave me an amazing construction crew, and suddenly within a month, just by landing in the Rann of Kutch, India, we started to build this magnificent, humongous structure in the middle of the salt flats of India. And those are the people who helped me assemble it. Working with different people in all these locations is also part of the experience because it changes from city to city, country to country. And I like how the language of construction and making has these shifts in it. And although my work seems kind of cold and devoid of sentiment, which I kind of intended to be, the making of it is much more humane and much more of a social event than one might think. So here we see the final version of the pink scaffold. We didn't really have an opening, but people saw it from a distance and kind of flocked to it. And they were like, what the hell is this? Is it a selfie point? And I didn't really explain what was going on. But for them, it was convincing enough to where they wanted to stop, walk around, think, and gawk at the landscape, think about the neighboring border of Pakistan, maybe even thinking about how the landscape of the Rann has changed because of climate change, or just embracing just the simple magnificence of the landscape in the process. So that was the pink scaffold on the Rann of Kutch. This piece was to come down in April 2020, but lo and behold, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And the people in Gujarat said, no one can even go there because India is in a lockdown and the scaffold's just going to sit till things get better. Obviously, things didn't get better. And then the monsoon hit and suddenly this very dry, arid salt landscape was covered with water, which led to a new piece, one that I couldn't document as well as I could because we were still in a pandemic and we couldn't send anyone down there. So there's something honest about this documentation, which is from someone's cell phone photo. Months later, the thing collapsed. And for me, eventually, it was kind of a metaphor for what was happening with the pandemic too. So that was something that is, I think it's still just sitting there crumbling. And then suddenly 2 years later or a year later, things are better. This was a piece, my fourth or fifth scaffold installation that I did this past summer in Ashland, when there was that moment, if you remember, between May and June where people could actually get out. Mostly everyone was vaccinated. So Scott Malburn of the Schneider Museum invited me to do a scaffold on the site of Willowit Ranch in Ashland, Oregon. And because we'd been in such a dismal situation and just come out of winter, I thought yellow would be a beautiful color to work with. And it also complemented the pastoral landscape really well. Thankfully, although Art Beyond, which is what this work was for, came down by July, the owners of the ranch were really kind and sweet to allow me to keep the scaffold up. It's still up and we're documenting it as the weather changes. So this is from about a week ago. All right, so now I'm going back in time and showing you what happened in between the yellow scaffold and after I did the pink scaffold. We're in a pandemic. I still want to make work, but to walk around with big scaffolds is really hard. So I 3D printed the scaffolds in miniature at my studio at WSU Vancouver. And every little trip I did, whether it was to Fort Worden while doing a residency at Centrum, or whether it was to the Faroe Islands, which is literally in the middle of nowhere, I took my little mini scaffolds with me, creating micro installations. The result of some of these micro installations led to a little solo show at a gallery called Agenda, which was pretty new at the time. And I really thank Jamie Wilson for trusting me to come up with something in the middle of the pandemic. So these are a few iterations of the same 3D printed scaffolds, but this time the material is richer, nicer, because I'm working with nickel-plated steel. I found a manufacturer in New York City to work with to help me with the printing of these scaffolds. And now wherever I travel, I try to take these with me because it's a fun little thing to photograph wherever you go. While I was making these pieces too, I wanted to create prints. And I thought embossing them would be a fun way to capture the weathering and the breaking down of the scaffold and the history of its travel. So I've been doing these series of embossings of the fragments of the scaffolds themselves, which is for me a good way to transition into what I also do, which is drawing. I do a lot of site-specific installations, currently focusing a lot on scaffolds, but I also have a super strong standalone practice in drawing. And some of you might know the series I did at the Portland Art Museum, which was a relationship with the Veterans Memorial Coliseum, a building I have long admired because of its simplicity, its grid, and also because of its history with housing the one and only championship that the Trailblazers have won. Yay. So these are a few quick glimpses of work from a show I did at the Portland Art Museum. That was the result of this series of the Coliseum. I present this right now because it just shows you some of my studies for this work, but it also aligns a little bit with the way I think about printmaking and how we keep making iterations and tests and plates. And I think that whole process of making tests and plates and iterations and sketch after sketch is very important, if not just as important or more interesting than the final product itself. So again, just a few more prints that have come out of this series, and a book that was a collaboration with Martha Lewis, Brian Libby, and Grace Cook Anderson, printed by Ampersand Fine Books in Portland, and a little poster that came out as a result as well. So from that whole relationship of one building, I started this relationship with another building, a building in Atlanta, Georgia. And these are a few drawings and prints that I did during the pandemic, because I could sit at home on my desk and make iteration after iteration of the same building, allowing myself to see what happens when there's a little shift in either the scale or the composition, etc. And that kind of sensibility is working really well when I'm sitting right now in my studio at Sitka, working with Julia, creating series of prints of either brutalist buildings around the world or buildings in Manhattan, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, these are colors that I saw the first few evenings in Sitka, and they're already feeding into my work. And in another week or two, maybe more, you will see what I've finally done. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sitka. Thank you, Julia. And that's my website if you need to reference it. Boom. I hope I didn't go too much over.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm such, since I first saw them, I'm such a fan of the scaffolding pieces. So it's just a delight to get to hear you talk about them in person. Thank you. Ahimsa Timoteo Bodhrán is a multimedia artist, activist, organizer, critic, and educator, weaving visual, acoustic, performative, textual, and terrestrial techniques. Ahimsa's work appears in 23 nations in the Americas, Africa, the Arab world, Asia, Europe, Australia, and the Pacific. A Tulsa Artist Fellow and National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, he is the author of Archipiélagos antes y después del Bronx, Lenapehoking, and South Bronx Breathing Lessons. Ahimsa is editor of the International Queer Indigenous issue of Yellow Medicine Review, a Journal of Indigenous Literature, Art, and Thought, and co-editor of the Native Dance Movement and Performance issue of Movement Research Performance Journal. Ahimsa collaborates with Indigenous, womanist, and queer trans communities of color to create compelling multimedia. Please make some joyful noise wherever you are, and welcome Ahimsa to the Sitka Center.
There you go. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here in Siletz and Grand Ronde territory. Greetings, relations. So I am going to begin with a PowerPoint presentation in the background. So I'm going to start sharing screen, and hopefully this will. My name is Ahimsa Timoteo Bodhrán. I am a multimedia artist, critic, educator, and organizer. I am from Mott Haven, fourth generation South Bronx. I am from the poorest congressional district in the country. Growing up, the average life expectancy for men from my neighborhood was 25 years old. Both of my parents were gang members, and 3 of my grandparents were dead before I was born. These images from Blood Waters reflect upon the intersecting Indigenous and queer trans people of color histories of the West Side Highway Piers, Hudson River, New York City, and Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and surrounding tribal territories. These unaltered nighttime photos reflect recurring intersections of identity, time, and place, bloodlines, violence, and survival. I am a survivor of abuse, harassment, and violence as both a child and adult. I first became a rape survivor at age 18 while living in Southern California, and became a rape survivor for a second time while living in the Bay Area. Violence has permeated so much of my life and that of my family's birth and chosen and communities. I have been an anti-violence organizer since I was a teenager. At 18, I co-founded and became the co-director of a 6-college consortium queer resource center. At 19, I became the youngest mayoral appointee ever to the San Francisco Human Rights Commission's LGBT Advisory Committee. At 22, I came out as trans. At 23, with Christopher Lee, Yosenio V. Lewis, Alex Austin, and many other friends, we founded the world's first transgender film festival. My photography transits the liminal spaces between urban and rural, artificial and organic. Building on my nighttime work, I often revisit the same sites during the day. I am interested in the blurred lines, all the stories lost and reclaimed. Abstract and figurative, I revisit sites of our continued removal and presence. In addition to unaltered photographic work, I create digitally manipulated images of material culture, troubling the boundaries between organicity and artificiality, the electric and the living. I received my BA in Women's Studies from San Francisco State University and my MFA from Brooklyn College of the City University of New York. My visual art has recently been exhibited at Flux Factory in Queens, part of a queer Arab North African West Asian show, and Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, as well as recent and upcoming shows in Arkansas and Oklahoma. I work across disciplines: video, printmaking, ceramics, beading, earthworks, and painting. I layer and sculpt sound, weaving field recordings with human voices and those of all our relations. I have a background in dance, movement, and performance. For many years, I collaborated with Rosie Simas Dance as a multimedia artist, installationist, creative critical marketing and grant writer. This is Rosie here. Journal editor, community outreach and engagement specialist, dialogue facilitator, and events organizer. Our project weave toward North America and the Pacific. I collaborate with Indigenous, womanist, and queer trans artists of color on multimedia movement projects such as Valerie Olivero, Alyssa Harkins, and Maggie Boyette. And I'm excited about new work I'm creating with womanist, queer, trans, Osage, Muskoki, Cherokee, and Chicanx artists, educators, and organizers. A critic and educator who has taught across the US, I have been an ABD PhD candidate in American Studies at Michigan State University, where I was a Dean's Recruitment Fellow, Interdisciplinary Inquiry and Teaching Fellow, and recipient of an Excellence in Diversity Award and Summer's Excellence in Teaching Award. I've organized dozens of interviews, dialogues, panels, and roundtable discussions, including a series coordinated with the Equality Center and Tulsa City County Library Hispanic Resource Center, which brought together 20 Latinx leaders from Tulsa and Greater Oklahoma. A National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, my writing appears in 200 publications in 23 nations. I am the author of the poetry and photography collections Archipiélagos, Antes y Después del Bronx, Lenapehoking, and South Bronx Breathing Lessons. I'm editor of the Queer Indigenous issue of Yellow Medicine Review, the first global queer Indigenous collection, which had over 90 contributors from around the world. And I'm the co-editor of the Native issue of Movement Research Performance Journal, which just came out 2 years ago. I recently organized the world's first transgender Arab dialogue in print, which is coming out from Sinister Wisdom later this year. National organizer, I rebuilt the leadership teams of the AWP Writers Conference, Latinx and LGBTQ Writers Caucuses, an honor to continue serving there. I've been on the planning committee for the National Latinx Writers Gathering for the past 2 years. And I organized a multilingual visibility campaign for queer, trans, Arab, Norwegian refugees and immigrants in Bergen, Norway, when I was in residence there for a few months. I am currently completing a queer, trans affirming Indigenous and people of color video visibility project based in Oklahoma. And I'm a little bit ahead of my slides. I was a little concerned, so I just kept on reading because I have my script for each slide. So these were from Norway, and this is the series in Oklahoma now that I've been working on that I'll be debuting later. And then I continue to organize back home through movement research, where I'm an Artist of Color Core Council member, working to support dance, movement, and performance artists of color. At the American Indian Community House back home in New York, I was a volunteer grant writer for years and co-organized Two-Spirit, Elder, Electoral, Arts, and Health and US Census-related outreach and programming during the coronavirus pandemic. As a grant writer, I helped win hundreds of thousands of dollars for Native women-led organizations and worked continually 2020 into 2021 to win vital elections. So it's an honor to be here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing and taking us inside your background and so many eclectic accomplishments. We're so pleased to have you with us. Okay. Georgina Reskala is a Mexican-Lebanese photographer living and working in Santa Monica, California. Georgina received her BFA and MFA from the Arts San Francisco. In 2017, she was shortlisted for the Haribon Award in Kyoto, Japan. Georgina's work is held in the public collections of the Portland Art Museum, the Frye Art Museum, Seattle, Washington, and Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, University of Oregon, and Museo Comunitario de Arte, Zacatecas, Mexico. Georgina's work deals with ideas of memory, history, and the power of narrative. Through repetition, her works question the distortion of history through time and tie into ideas of collective memory and our shared past. Reskala is represented by PDX Contemporary Art, and right now she is part of Sitka's Shared and Present, Sitka's Shared Present. We're so glad that she is here. Please welcome Georgina Reskala to the Sitka Center.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm so pleased and grateful to be here at Sitka, such a beautiful space. I am going to share my screen.
And while Georgina's doing that, I'll just thank our audience. There are over 100 people joining for this presentation, the first of the year. So just thrilled to have you all. Sitka's largest space when we can gather in person. It's a tight fit to have 80 people in the space at one time. So it's so exciting to have so many people able to participate from all over. So many past residents and future residents who are on their way but aren't here yet have been logging in for these. So it's exciting.
Okay, so my work is a series of self-imposed rules and systems in which I peel the layers in order to try to understand and make sense. By unfolding, layering, cutting up, and transforming, I investigate the way stories get reshaped and history is written. Immigrants go through a slow process of forgetting the roots and language in exchange for safety. For several years now, and particularly since the pandemic, I have been trying to formulate what my role as an artist is. I am often told that my work is not political and does not represent my origins, but my work and my process, although not evidently political in nature, are very much rooted in the way I see the world. It is political and it is personal. I need to tear away the layers and shape and reshape in order to understand and reframe. That is how I have always navigated the world. My photographs, as well as my sculptural works, are rooted in language, memory, and migration. I shoot film with medium and large format cameras. I use long exposures through sustained attention. I print and reshoot many times over. I use paper and textiles in order to mimic not just the process of remembering and forgetting, but to question the way in which personal and collective memories get created and carried on. I create sculptural photographs by reshaping the images. I feel like not having a horizon or a landmark to hold on to creates a feeling of dislocation and disorientation. The landscape is seen with our eyes, but felt with our senses. Especially for marginalized people in particular, the landscape is a place filled with cultural and psychogeographical implications. Through my work, I tried to dismantle the ideas of landscape as repository of dreams and memories and question the psychological effects of space. I think about the psychological implication of territories and colonization for different peoples and for the earth. Through my work, I question my own fragmentation and my need to redraw my personal maps. Landscape then becomes less of a background for a life lived, but more a stage filled with those who belong in front of the curtain, the privileged, the forgotten, the seen, and the invisible. Landscape is no longer a terrain with a horizon filled with mythical ideas and dreams, but rather a place in which redrawing the maps becomes urgent to me. These are some sculptural pieces that I've been making for a while. They're photographs. This is a grid of, I believe it's 52 images. They're all of the ocean, most of them, except for a couple that's in the middle holding. But they're mostly, there's the same spot, the same place in Santa Monica on the beach where I live. And this is a series of 6 photographs that encompass one landscape. This is printed on textiles, and so is this one.
Georgina, we're seeing the same screen.
Can you see any
Yes.
pieces now?
Yes. Yeah, this is great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm quickly going to go through them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
These are, this is a grid made of 5x7, 52 5x7 gelatin silver prints of the exact same spot. But this is printed on linen. And so is this one. They're big pieces. I print either on paper or on fabric. This is some pieces, some collage pieces with drawing that I've been working on now. This is an embroidered piece. It's a photograph on cotton embroidered. This is a sculpture of, I forget the number of images that are glued together, but it's the same photograph, and it's 1 minute per print that it took me to take this photograph. This is another sculptural piece made on paper, and so is this one. These are some images that I print on linen, and then I unthread either the weft of the weave. It's a dying art in Mexico, which has been used for decorative purposes, and I've been using it for a while as a means to sort of mimic the way that stories get erased from not just personal memories, but collective histories. Those are all my threads that I save. This is a series also of women portraits printed on linen and embroidered. And this is an ongoing series that I have of photographs that are either mine or copies of found photographs that I photograph, then print, and then I sand different areas, and then I reshoot and reprint. And I think that's it. Yes, we've come to the end. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sorry for the technical issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgina. When we are logging on to start these talks before the audience joins us, one of the things I always say, because it's true, is that the Sitka audience who joins us for these talks is, they're here for you. They're here to hear about your work and support your work. No one's expecting a perfect technical show. I know how frustrating it feels, and no one logged off during everyone's still here. We're so happy
Thank
to
you.
see your work.
Thank you.
And we've put the link to Georgina's website in the chat too, if you're feeling starved, like you didn't get to spend quite as much time with some of those images as you wanted. Okay. Roxanne Everett is a contemporary landscape painter who is inspired by wilderness areas of the US and abroad. Roxanne worked first as an architect and later received a master's degree from the University of Washington in forest ecology. Preferring outdoor environments, she spent many years as a national park backcountry ranger, living and working months at a time in remote alpine environments. Roxanne was selected as an artist in residence for several arts organizations in the US, Iceland, Australia, and Greece, and is a member of Women Painters of Washington. Roxanne's work is shown regularly at various locations across the Pacific Northwest. 5 national parks have her work in their permanent collections, and right now Sitka has her on our campus. Please join me in a warm welcome for Roxanne Everett to the Sitka Center.
Yay.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here at Sitka and appreciate the time to show my work as well. I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully I won't have any problems here. My work is about pristine wilderness areas and various natural ecosystems. The paintings are all intended to encourage others to forge their own connections to the natural world and hopefully lead towards stewardship. As you mentioned, I have a background in architecture and also have a master's degree in forest ecology. And I feel that both of those have played a very important role in the direction of my work. The first 2 images that I have here, actually they're out of order, but this is what I was going to start with. So I have a very varied past. Besides my degrees in architecture and my practice in architecture and forestry, I've also done a fair amount of hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail and some other long distance trails. Some of this led into me becoming a backcountry ranger in some incredibly scenic areas, particularly when I was a backcountry ranger in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, where I would go in for the entire summer, have my food and gear helicoptered into me, and basically be in these incredibly scenic remote areas for months at a time. I have 2 images here on my backcountry journaling that I did while I was a backcountry ranger. This is one of my stations that I had in Kings Canyon. And another page from my journaling when I was there is showing the boxes that I would use to store my food, or boxes or containers I would use when I went further into the backcountry. I'm showing these for 2 reasons. First, that I was really pleased and honored when the National Park Service picked these up and made a permanent exhibit for the Grant Grove Visitor Center in Kings Canyon National Park using my journal. But also I do some sketching like this in preparation for some of my more large scale work. This is an early piece. This is Blue Glacier, which is an Olympic National Park. This is pretty representative of a lot of the work that I do, doing much more expansive landscapes. This is showing the climbing route up to Mount Olympus in Olympic National Park, which I did in 2007. A little bit more recent piece is Ingalls Peaks, which is found in central Washington. This piece measures 20 by 28. And you can see here something that I've been doing quite frequently with my landscape paintings is using pattern to delineate space and form. And that is something that I have done very often with many of my landscape paintings. My process involves using photos, getting outside every day, doing sketches, journaling, looking at resource material to get the right information for some of the more ecosystem-based work. This is late spring on McGregor Mountain. This is a view from my home in Stehekin, Washington. This piece measures 12 inches by 16 inches. I wanted to show this work because I think it The use of lines to delineate space and form, I feel kind of reflects back onto my architecture past where we were doing a lot of line work there. I should note that when I was an architect, this was pre-computer aided drafting. So all the rendering, lettering, drafting was all done by hand. And so I feel like that has really lent itself well to some of my more detailed landscape paintings. This is below Dallas Guard Pass. This piece is 20 inches by 28 inches. All these paintings, by the way, are acrylic paintings. This is a piece that I did from an artist residency that I had in Iceland. So this is in Northern Iceland. Again, you can see a lot of use of line work to delineate form and spaces in the painting. This is another work from the Iceland series. This is Hulshrina, also measuring 20 by 28. This painting also has a lot more of the line work, but it also has the reflections that were very unusual for to see, especially in the late winter and early spring. The freezing and the thawing occurring creates these amazing reflections, especially in northern Iceland. And I did a pretty large series just based on the reflections of this area. This piece is called Icelandic Reflections, and it's 16 by 20. Sometimes my landscapes become a little bit abstracted, and I felt like this was a good example of that. Just by the cropping, even though everything else is accurate, the cropping can totally turn a landscape into a very abstracted image. This is late afternoon in the fossil fields. This was from an artist residency I had at Agate Fossil Beds, the National Monument. I included this image because I felt that it connected more with several viewers. I've had a lot of people really love this painting. It's a very, much of my work like this is very approachable. It's very relatable. I think back on everyone has an image in their head of what a sunrise or a sunset looks like across prairie grasses or and grasses in general. And this kind of reflects upon that. Another work that's a little bit more abstracted, much smaller work, if I can find it here, is Scuderic Rocks. This is a smaller painting, and this was from Acadia National Park. Also from Acadia National Park is this image, a painting of Bates Cairn. In Acadia National Park, which is in Maine, if people don't know about it, in Acadia National Park, if you get above tree line on the long reaches of granite, it becomes difficult to find your way. So cairns are actually a very necessary part for navigation. I tend to shy away from human-made artifacts in my landscapes, but this is such an important cultural and historic artifact that I felt it was a good example of the Acadian landscape. This was, by the way, a donation for my 2018 residency at Acadia National Park. And a Bates Cairn, for those who are curious, is basically 2 to 4 rocks as a base, a mantle rock over top of that, and a pointer stone that shows which way you're supposed to go at the top. I had 3 images I think I'm going to skip over just to save a little bit of time here and jump ahead here to this. This is kind of the direction that my work has been going more recently, and what I'm going to be focusing on more while I'm here at Sitka Center. And that is I'm looking more at getting back to my forestry and forest ecosystems background from the UW. This is looking at a forested landscape. Instead of the great expansive views, it's a little bit more of a narrow landscape, but it's looking at all the plants and all the communities that are found within. And so this is kind of more of a direction I'll be going while I'm here. This is a painting that I did of a red spruce community with the mosses being very patterned to show the different colors and textures and patterns that are found at ground level. The next painting I call Trail Puddle. This is kind of a mixed conifer stand with the white blooming ceanothus with a trail puddle. And the last 4 images are all paintings that I've done in the last month, maybe month and a half. These are all kind of from this type of ecosystem that you have here in Sitka. This is nearer to Olympia. I don't even have this piece named yet. It's 12 by 16, but it's showing a Douglas fir, sword fern, salal community. Very wet environment, much like what you have here. I also do a lot of singularities to support these types of landscapes that I do. I'm very drawn to conchs that you find on trees. While I was in college for forest ecology, I focused a lot on tree decay organisms. And this is a red belt fungus, or Fomitopsis panicola, which causes a brown cubicle rot, ultimately leading to tree failure. This is 10 inches by 10 inches. A very ubiquitous plant found throughout the Northwest. It's fairy bells. This is a 12-inch by 12-inch painting. I'm sure you have this here. We have a lot of this everywhere that I live, up a little bit north of here and in the Cascades. And last but not least, the most recent painting I've done is ghost pipes. This measures 12 inches by 12 inches. Ghost pipes, or Monostropa uniflora, is a flowering parasitic plant. It lacks chlorophyll, and therefore it relies on energy from other types of fungi. And that is all I have, but I hope you enjoy the images.
Roxanne, thank you so much. And thanks everyone who's sending in so many warm comments in the chat. It's just been a joy to read. Roxanne, I think there might be a question somewhere in there for you to type an answer to about painting in cold environments.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks so much. Okay. Mariah Reading is an eco-artist and strong advocate for the existence, preservation, and accessibility of the outdoors. Mariah was born and raised in Bangor, Maine, where the surrounding landscape gave her a deep appreciation of nature's beauty that was reinforced by her degree in visual arts at Bowdoin College. The 2016 National Park Centennial propelled her recycled landscapes, designed to bring attention to the need of preserving and protecting the environment. Mariah has dedicated herself to the field of eco-art through her artist in residence at Denali, Zion, Acadia National Parks, working as an Arts in the Parks volunteer at the Guadalupe Mountains National Park, assisting in Yosemite facelift efforts, developing a K-12 stream curriculum with University of California, Santa Barbara oceanography students, and creating conservation workshops with the Channel Islands National Park. Mariah has exhibited work in Texas, Washington, Colorado, Alaska, Maine, Hawaii, and New York, and has an upcoming show in Davis, California. From April through October, Mariah is an environmental interpreter, but right now she is an artist in residence at Sitka Center. Please welcome Mariah Reading to Sitka.
Woo! Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Here, I'll share my screen. Awesome. Slideshow mode. Okay, everyone can see? Cool. So yeah, I grew up in the middle of Maine, in Bangor, Maine, and I was constantly inspired by these gorgeous landscapes around me. I grew up by 2 rivers and was kind of more inland by the forest, but it was accessible to get to the ocean, to get to Baxter State Park, which is the end of the Appalachian Trail, to get up to Canada, to get down to Massachusetts. You know, it's just kind of everything. So being immersed in that, I couldn't help but, you know, being inspired by the landscape. But the thing that I started to notice when I was in college was all of my work was kind of installation based. It was, we would create, and then at the end of the semester and the term or end of the show, you know, it all just got tossed away. And I took this one mold making class where we would mix these rubber vats of mold making supplies as well as concrete. And if anything touched those surfaces, they had to be thrown out. So we would just accumulate so much waste within the art studio that I began to draw this parallel between feeding landfills and creating landscapes. And, you know, being inspired by landscapes and wanting to be a landscape painter, I was working mostly 2D with oils at that point. Like, I needed to resolve this in some minor way. I couldn't, you know, continue this practice if these landscapes that so fuel me as an artist were being harmed. So I ended up gathering together a bunch of crusty paintbrushes and old paint tubes that just accumulated the corners, the nooks and crannies of my studio. And I adhered them together to form a cohesive canvas. And then I painted a landscape that was really dear to me onto it. So this is a landscape of the Grand Tetons National Park. Where I worked the summer before. So that was the summer of 2015. So again, kind of instead of these materials harming that landscape, they became the landscape. So from there, I was kind of thinking how to transition, how to continue. And I was, at that point, I was kind of inspired by you know, national parks. I grew up really close to Acadia, which is Wabanaki Confederacy land. So national parks have always kind of been in the back of my mind. And I got to work in 2017 at the Guadalupe Mountains National Park, which is Mescalero, Apache, and Humanus land. And this was the first time that I got to live and breathe within that space, as opposed to just driving for, you know, a long weekend, accumulating trash and making something out of it. And I found this half a hubcap. So the Guadalupe Mountains has a major trucking route, highway cutting through, splitting the park. And so I found a lot of trash pieces. So throughout this project, I've kind of noticed how the trash and debris reflect the landscape around them and how they are portraits of the place that I'm immersed within. So I found this half a hubcap that had cracked off to form the mountain range that I was living in. So it just was this kind of magical connection where I realized I didn't have to paint the sky could be the sky. And I kind of delved into this realm of not only painting, but now photography and these sculptural based items. So Guadalupe Mountains is the largest exposed fossilized reef in the world. So yeah, the half a hubcap formed that mountain range line. So that's kind of where this trajectory of my work started. So these pieces are all called recycled landscapes. So this is just kind of a walk in the park of kind of what my process looks like. I have two different realms of work. When I'm out, I love being outside. I'm actually a interpretive park ranger in the summers as well. So I love being outside. So usually when I go hiking or backpacking, I bring with me a little paint kit and bags to throw debris in. So the thing about these coastal communities, and that I'm really kind of looking forward to seeing here at Sitka, are the land themselves are pristine. They're virtually, you know, spotless. It's really encouraging to see like major stewards of these lands pick up what they, you know, find. But the marine debris that gets washed up on our oceans is the overwhelming, you know, thing that just makes me want to vomit. So this is, you know, just kind of a 5-minute walk on the beach, finding, again, things that are reflective of this coastal Maine community. So, you know, some buoys, plastic items, a lot of fishing lines, and rope. So first I, you know, kind of so this is one of the items that I found right, you know, in the same general area of where I found it. And if the elements are good, I really enjoy plein air painting. So painting outside, I sand the layer down and add a ground color that's the opposite of the color that I'm about to paint. So the painting can kind of ignite and seem a little sparkly. So this is a buoy that I worked on. And then you can see my friend there in the corner. And I think there was a question about if my paints freeze or if Roxanne's paints freeze. This one was New Year's a few years back, and my paints did freeze. So I had to kind of back and forth, but you know, got to do it for the art. So yeah, I laid in the background first, and then kind of work my way in with you know, more general tones and colors, laying in the Cadillac Mountain granite that runs along the coast of Mount Desert Island, where I was living. And then finally, kind of the final image that I capture. So the art not only is the painted object itself, but also the aligned photograph of it within the environment. And I'm hoping in that way, people can see themselves reflected not only in the objects, but put themselves in the space as well, if they've walked similar trails or been to similar locations. And all that. Originally, I really wanted to kind of eliminate my hand. I was like, get that out of there. It's too cluttered, it's too busy. But I've really kind of come to enjoy the use of the hand within these prints, because it shows how our hands touch the land and what our human impact is on those lands. And for some projects that I do, it's not my hand holding the object. I get different stewards of the landscape, or you know, in volunteers that work throughout the park, or park rangers, or people that are, you know, scientists that are working on that area, to kind of have it be a portrait of their impact on that land as well, not just my own. So getting kind of more into recent work that I'm hoping to do while here at Sitka. I grew up swimming, and the water is a very important element to my work. So being right there on the river here, leading to the ocean, I've been dipping pretty often, and I'm excited to kind of do some work while in the water, or responding to kind of the changing in tides. So this was a piece that I had the privilege of going snorkeling with sea lions in Argentina, and the woman who ran the shop gave me these goggles that were, you know, decommissioned and everything. And then I got to respond to them when I was back in Maine, living in Seal Harbor. So not quite Sea Lion Harbor, but close enough. But again, just kind of the connection of coastline. I was on a similar coastline thousands of miles away, and kind of what that debris conversation is, and what that, you know, the watershed that all kind of creates one. So this is kind of a conversation about that. And something that I'm hoping to do while here at Sitka is get more into wildlife paintings. This was kind of my first stab at it. I too really like to just focus on the pure landscapes, but there's a lot of amazing, impactful wildlife here that I'd love to paint. So this is another direction that I'm hoping to go. Last year, when I was living on Mount Desert Island as a part of Acadia National Park, I collected all these gloves, just, you know, mittens that slipped out of pockets, whatever, collected them, sewed them together, and stretched them around canvas bars in kind of a traditional canvas way. And then painted this cove that was right by my house onto it. And it's just really interesting to kind of see how the textures of the found objects that I'm painting on mimic the textures of what I'm painting. So, you know, the thumbs of the glove and the knuckles and all that formed these cool ocean tumbled rocks. And yeah, this was a really fun piece. And again, I like doing more mixed media things. So integrating sewing into my practice as well has been delightful, and yeah, just really exciting. So we'll see, maybe it'll be like a bunch of old socks next. And then this is another, I've got a lot of ideas about where to go, so I got to whittle them down. But another thing that I did, so kind of in the vein of my first project where I took all of my old paint tubes and paint brushes and all of that. So I did that. I collected all of my paint and carried it around with me for 2 or 3 years in my car. And was really close to throwing it away for a while, but held on to it. And then I sculpted a bust, my own head, to show kind of my impact as well. I don't want my work to, point a finger at everyone. Like, I'm a consumer as well, and I am trying to mitigate my own waste accumulated within my practice. So when I do some work on my own trash, I kind of want that message to be clear. And then I aligned it in this lupin field that it was on the island. And by the time I aligned it, the lupins had all kind of gone to seed and were gone. But that shows the transition of time and how these landscapes aren't stagnant, but continuously moving and grooving. So again, that was one of those things that before, when I started this project, I was like, no, why isn't that everything perfect? Like when I took the photo or whatever. And now it's just like, well, that's time and change. And we're kind of, as a landscape painter, grasping these moments that are fleeting, kind of in the midst of climate change. So kind of leaned more into that. And then this summer, I worked as a ranger at Voyageurs National Park, which is Ojibwe land. And so this is another, getting into the water realm. I'm a big canoer and kayaker. So I found this Adidas slide just nestled on the corner of the lakeside, and then brought all of my paints with me as I went out on the sea kayak in this major lake called Rainy Lake. And just shoved my little paint palette into the bungees and painted while I was kayaking. So to add kind of another element of movement and, wind and sun and all of these kind of elements definitely keeps things alive and sporty. And then this was the finished piece that I got to do. So I'm hoping to kind of do things in that direction here. I really enjoy painting on shoes because it directly shows our human footprint on the landscape. So this one in particular was the first painting that I did while in northern Minnesota. So that's kind of my woo spiel. You can find me, my website's listed on the top, and I'm happy to put that in the notes. And then you can also, feel free to follow me on Instagram or Facebook if, that works for you. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and meet all of you.
Thank you, Mariah, and thanks everyone for continuing to post just wonderful supportive comments in the chat. We have one more presenter who I can't wait to hear. MK Chavez is a Black Latinx writer and educator. She is the author of Dear Animal and several chapbooks. Chavez curates the reading series Lyrics and Dirges, is co-director of the Berkeley Poetry Festival and poetry editor at Bronzeville Quarterly. She is a recipient of the Penn Oakland Award and the 2021 San Francisco Foundation Nomadic Press Literary Award. You can find recent work at the Academy of Poets Poem a Day series and Golden Gate Park Among the Trees with the Voice of Trees projects. Please welcome MK Chavez to Sitka.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you so much for sticking around. I think this is a long program. I've really loved hearing the other residents talk about their work. We only recently got here, so I'm still getting familiar with folks. I'm a writer, and there's stuff in my bio about my writing, and I'm actually going to mainly talk about what I'm working on here. And I was particularly interested in coming to Sitka, and because I'm working on a project that is about people who go missing in wild places. And I wanted to talk, so I have a presentation part that's recorded, but before I play that, I want to talk about my process and how I came to it. So I came to this idea, this, kind of fascination with people who go missing in wild places from personal experience. So when I was about 8 years old, my family was camping in Yosemite Park, and my mother had her first psychotic break. And in her moment, she felt that I would be safer in the forest. So she took me out to the forest and she left me there because I would be safer there. And of course, I was a kid and I actually believed my mom. There was no reason not to believe her. And it has been it was an experience that really stuck with me in terms of how I related to nature for the rest of my life. And a few years ago, I thought it would be really an interesting thing to find records about, either the report that was taken by rangers or the local police, someone, right? Like I just wanted to look and see what that looked like. I was working on a different project, a memoir project. And so I thought I could include some information from there, and spoke to some really amazing rangers at Yosemite Park, and there were no records, and ended up having a really beautiful conversation about how there really isn't any tracking that happens when people go missing in national parks. There certainly isn't any kind of national warehousing of like that information. And that was just too delicious to pass up. And so I started doing more research. And I think part of my joy in writing is, half of it is doing the research actually, and getting to do one of the things that I love doing, which is learning and observing and really just taking in what I learned. So I learned a lot. And kind of where it's taken me is that, the idea, so I started very narrowly, like people who go missing in wild places, like literally people who walk into a state park and just and disappear. And we just don't, we don't find out what's happened to them for a long time. Sometimes bodies are never recovered. I started doing all of that kind of work. But what started to open up from there was, the institutional learning about how there's no tracking, learning about, what the process is between the state park police and the local police, like learning all these things. So the institutional opened up. I started, kind of looking at what happens when somebody is crossing the desert to come into the United States and they go missing. What happens to those folks? What's the process for finding them? What is the process for somebody who wants to go missing and if people are trying to find? I just started to it started to just open up. And what I found, what I came to was kind of a collection of just enormous amounts of data. And you'll see, I'm going to actually show what the data has turned into for me. And I started just writing. I was getting up at, for a while, I was getting up at 6 a.m. and just writing for a couple of hours to try to download everything that was in my head onto paper. And I just started numbering everything. So I have hundreds, I'm in the hundreds now, of just notations, facts, small facts that I'm finding, big facts that I'm finding. So and as I thought more about those numbers, because then I started looking at the numbers and thinking, well, is this going to make sense for, for a book? Is this actually viable for a book? And I started to actually explore why it was that I actually started to number these facts, and realized that in my efforts to learn about missing people, the incredible amount of information that I found became overwhelming, and that on an emotional or spiritual level, and that I really needed, my brain wanted to make sense of it. And the only sense I could make of it was to actually put numbers to it. So I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to try to be really fancy here. So bear with me if it takes me a moment. 95. Government entities that do not know how many people go missing in the wilderness. Department of the Interior, National Park Service, Department of Agriculture, U.S. Forest Service, Department of Indian Affairs, Border Patrol. 29. Missing, lost, disappeared, MIA, astray, AWOL, away, unaccounted for, nowhere to be found, not present, absent, non-existent, taken leave, turned to dust, vanished into thin air, mysterious disappearance. 48. You can pay for a helicopter to search for your missing person. There's special equipment that will pick up heat measurements. The heat searching equipment will cost you more. Not every helicopter is equipped. 26. There are conflicting opinions. Some say if you disappear accidentally, know that it may not be easy to find you. One particular scholar says, it is not as easy as you'd imagine to disappear. 18. Keith Cormican has worked 125 missing persons cases. Of these cases, he located 22 bodies. He is known for being an expert in the retrieval of bodies from lakes and rivers, specifically Lake Tahoe. Once, he found bodies that had been missing for over 10 years. Once, he found a body that no one was missing. 3. Bloodhounds can track a live being or a cadaver. Some say a bloodhound can smell a violent death. 43. After searching for years, a father who'd been looking for his missing son was informed that the body had been found. He was told not to come to the site. 28. In 2018, Los Angeles buried 1,457 unidentified bodies in their annual ceremony. 51. Chances of disappearing into the desert increase when Border Patrol intentionally scatters groups. 52. Operation Wetback was the largest mass deportation in the United States history. It's estimated that 1.3 million were returned to Mexico, including many United States citizens. 76. On September 26, 2014, 43 normalistas went missing in Mexico. 30,000 people have disappeared in Mexico since 2006. 33. Guidelines about people gone missing on the border say search and rescue for the first 3 days, then look for them in detention. After a month, they say consider the person has died. 77. In the anthology Poets for Ayotzinapa, Mexico City, poems written for the normalistas, one poet lists the missing by nickname. Copia, copy, because of his memory. Pila, battery, for his late night work. Barely visible to begin with, their disappearance has made them impossible to ignore. 16. It is easy to fall into a dream of loss, but it is equally easy to fall into a life of endless inquiry.
64. The desire to have someone to blame is so utterly flawed and so utterly human. 45. Reading about missing people makes me question my existence. 94. There are disappearances every day. People are left behind. People are forgotten. It's not dramatic. People simply slip away and become ghosts moving through their days unnoticed. 13. The missing person becomes a constant companion, a fox stole around your neck, a ghostly weight. 20. At one point, I was writing a book about the night that my mother took me into the forest to lose me, a book about how nature saved me, the way she thought it would. 62. I began writing this book in 2021 as we entered the second year of the pandemic. 21. It turns out I'm writing a book about absence. 81. Does going missing make you the past, the present, or the future?
Thank you for listening. That was an excerpt from the work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, MK, for that gripping and perspective altering presentation. Thank you, all of you, for participating in this evening. One of my favorite things about this format is how many people are able to participate and come together. One of my least favorite parts about this format is we all like log off and then there's just like this vacuum instead of people mingling at the end of an event. So just hold that space and pretend we're all mingling and learning more and introducing ourselves in person. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you MK, Mariah, Roxanne, Georgina, Ahimsa, and Avantika. So grateful for all of you coming together, coming to Sitka and sharing your work with us tonight. Happy New Year, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at our March resident talk. Good night, everybody.